My name is Chris Stepanian. Welcome. And yeah, definitely thank you for coming over and braving the gap. I'd like to introduce our moderator today. His name is Stu Scantlebury. He's the senior advisor for the Boston Consulting Group. He has 37 years of management and IT consulting experience. And I think you will have a very interesting and informative time listening to these panelists. Stu.
Thank you very much. I'm not actually the senior advisor. There's like 39 other senior advisors for BCG. A number of them are ex-partners, as I am, and then others are industry people who have worked part-time for us. So yes, it's true. I've been a management consultant for 37 years. My IT goes back even before then to learning Fortran using punch cards on an IBM 360. So I'm pretty old. Now, I'll introduce the panel in a second, but you should know this, that they are seated in the same order as they are in the brochure. So if you open that up, you'll see them exactly like that. Now, IT in the extended enterprise is something that I've been interested in since the early 90s. And when I got into it and first exposed, really, it was working for McKinsey at the time, and then I switched to BCG in 1993. And AT&T was my client in both cases. And it was extended enterprise inside of an enterprise. In this case, AT&T had bought Macaw Cellular, so that became AT&T Wireless, but it really operated like a separate company. There's the original long-distance company. There were the retail stores, which you might remember don't exist anymore. The Universal Card, which I believe Citibank owns now, but I still have one of the original AT&T Universal Cards. They were doing startup experiments with local telephone service. They had the AT&T WorldNet, and they had some TV deals that they were doing at the time. So all of these were like separate companies under the AT&T umbrella. And they asked, first when I was with McKinsey and the same project still going with BCG, how can we sell bundles of services across all of these to our highest value customers and then provision for it, bill for it, et cetera. So it is exactly the extended enterprise, but happens to be within one legal boundary. Then as we got into the dot-com era, we saw like Covacent and other kinds of marketplace hubs coming up, a different internet-enabled extended enterprise that went beyond the legal boundaries of firms. And in 2002, I led a research study that we did called IT Architecture for the Extended Enterprise. And so we looked at RosettaNet and Covacent and Ariba and Commerce One and so forth. So that was kind of the enablers of the extended enterprise in that era. Today we're going to hear about some things that exist today that are quite different from that, but of course all of that is still there. Even EDI is still there, as we'll hear a little bit today. Now, I just want to say today I'm working with a client, the Atlanta Housing Authority, and they have extended enterprise issues. They are more than a traditional public housing authority. They are really an orchestrator of sustainable communities for low-income people, and they have more than 60 partners that they need to deal with. A number of them have big data exchange. They have property management companies, real estate developers, but also the school system of Atlanta, the police, the mayor's office, all of these things. And so IT needs to enable all of this stuff to come together so that they can orchestrate public-private partnerships to make these communities and make them work. So I'm living this day to day right now. So let me introduce the panel. So our panelists are four people who are either working in or studying extended enterprises. Tim Hebert is the CEO of Atrion, a Rhode Island-based IT services firm offering customized technology solutions. And Tim, want to raise your hand? Yep. I didn't know the order that they'd be sitting when I wrote this, but sorry. So in addition to building portions of IT-enabled extended enterprise architectures for their clients, Tim's also the chairman of the board of One N Service. It's a global consortium of advanced technology integrators like Atrion. And it has a flexible extended enterprise that is 40 companies in North, Central, and South America, and then 17 companies in Europe. Jay Leader is the Senior Vice President of Information Technology, CIO for iRobot in Burlington, Mass. You probably know them for their Roomba robotic vacuum cleaners. How many have a Roomba? All right, I have to get one.
Nice.
Those are the cool kids.
The cool kids.
Those are the cool kids. See me after.
But iRobot also offers a range of robotic devices for industrial, government, and educational uses. It's in many ways a virtual corporation. It doesn't manufacture anything, and it sells through distributors and retailers. So what they focus on, their employees, is the strategic intellectual property, including software, mechanical, and electrical design. These employees orchestrate a complex value chain to bring these robots to market. Marc Ferrentino here, on my left, is the chief architect, and we don't mean IT architect, we mean the architect of all the products for Salesforce.com. I think you're all aware of their customer relationship management product. They offer software as a service. That and cloud computing in general are two of the modern tools at the disposal of extended enterprise IT architects. But in addition to this product, which put them on the map, there are now a number of products, including Force.com, you've probably heard of. It's a platform for building cloud-based applications. They have Database.com, a cloud-based enterprise database, and Chatter, which is cloud-based collaboration platform, a lot like Facebook, but for private use. In addition to providing the tools to build the extended enterprise IT architecture, Salesforce.com is also part of one. Its extended enterprise includes developers, software providers, database providers, and of course, their own customers. On the end, we have Dr. Ted Piepenbrock. He's the director of the International Institute for Strategic Leadership. He's also a researcher and lecturer both at the MIT Sloan School, the MIT Center for Technology Policy and Industrial Development, and at the University of Oxford in England. And as we were preparing for this panel, he was always calling in from Oxford. So thanks for flying over. Ted's dedicated the past 10 years of his life to studying extended enterprises. At your seats, you'll see there's a handout with several slides that have been excerpted from his presentation entitled The Evolution of Interspecies Competition Between Extended Enterprise Architectures. So he's kind of taking the Darwinian approach and looking at various extended enterprises, how they compete each other, who dies, who survives, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that. Ted's research focuses on different ways that networks of companies compete with each other. It reminds me of an interview that I did during that research project back in 2002. I asked an automotive executive how they were competing with other auto companies, and he said, it's no longer our firm versus the other two, but our supply chain against their supply chains. So even in 2002, they were thinking, we have to have a network of lots of companies, the tier 1 suppliers, the tier 2 suppliers, the tier 3 suppliers, all orchestrated to compete against the same thing the other guys are doing. So his research is not particularly IT focused, but he looks at all the business aspects of extended enterprises. And I think it's useful for us to see a conceptual model of how business might be evolving, and then we can think about what are the information and technology implications of that. So my first question is going to be for Ted, because I'd like you all to hear the basics of his model. And now typically it takes him a whole day to explain this, but we're going to try to get it down to about 5 minutes so that you can keep this in the back of your head as you hear about people who are living and breathing in real extended enterprises or providing software for it. All right. Now, the last 20 minutes we're going to save for questions, and so we're going to be monitoring the time for that, so you all get a chance to stand at one of the mics like you've seen in the other sessions. But for right now, we're going to do the panel, and the first question is for Ted. So you've created this conceptual model for extended enterprises. It has two archetypes in it. One he calls modular, the other he calls integrated. And I'm going to give you my interpretation of what this is. So the modular architecture is a system of loosely coupled companies that do business with each other. They use straightforward protocols that have a high level of transaction specificity. So think about an EDI transaction, or think about doing selling some stock on the stock exchange. It's very specific. You say, this is the ticker number, this is the quantity, this is the price. It's that kind of very narrow information information between them. To me, to make it IT-oriented, think about a PC where the CPU is like a company and it's at the center of this extended enterprise, and it communicates with memory and with disk drives and with ports and so forth. And it's got a very highly engineered way of sending messages back and forth. It doesn't have rich information. It's designed in advance. But what it does do is allow plug and play. So you can use different kinds of memory, different disk drives, and so forth. And so this modular architecture enables plug and play, but it has other limitations in terms of flexibility and so forth. So the other one he talks about is the integrated model. And this one tends to have long-term trust-based relationships between the companies and very rich information flow, often the kind of information that you have a hard time getting into a transaction. So there'll be contracts and documents and knowledge and designs and all kinds of things flowing back and forth. So these are at two ends of a spectrum. You're all going to say, well, I don't think any company is just one or the other, but you can probably say there's aspects of both in many companies. And so I would like Ted to give us a little introduction to what he's found in his 10 years of thinking.
So Stu, thanks very much, and that was a great summary. It's great to be here. I tend to talk fast, so I apologize. Just slow me down. So I just wanted to kind of level set on some constructs or concepts, and if they're helpful, great. Otherwise, let's just jettison them and talk about real stuff. So the most important thing, so I'm up at 100,000 feet at CEO level and above, and we'll talk about how IT plays into that. So like Stu said, so before we talk about the extended enterprise, I'm interested in performance. So the dependent variable that I'm interested in explaining over the long term is what feeds the bulldogs. And I'm interested, the slide 2 at the bottom, I'm interested in looking at shareholder value. And I'm looking over long periods of time. And you can already see what this is known around the world as the red-blue discussion. And you see certain companies have sustained shareholder value, and they're beating the blue guys times X, times 10. So there's Toyota, world-class manufacturing, Southwest Airlines, world-class services, et cetera. So the key is not just that they're delivering much more shareholder value. When you work with the senior leaders of these red companies, they're not trying to maximize that. So the big question is what's going on, and we'll begin to try to plug in a model that these guys can hopefully throw rocks at or agree with. So interested, that's what we're trying to explain. Nothing more. Is IT cool or sexy? I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what is long-term performance. If we turn the page, as Stu articulated, and again, I'll do this in 3 minutes. So the top one is this typology, okay? We want to, just for conversation, describe the ends of the spectrum, and all your firms are in between. And what this extended enterprise, there are so many stakeholders. I'm just going to focus on 4 because we have a very small amount of time. So the vertical axis is the value chain, customers, firms, suppliers, and distribute. You can put in whatever you want, but that's the value stream. And then if you recall from Economics 101, there's the factors of production, capital and labor, for example, right? So we have these 4 stakeholders. Now, when we're architects of the extended enterprise, we do a functional decomposition of the organization. So the function of investors is to give $1 and ask for $1.20 at the end of the year. That's all they do. The function of employees, they want stable year-on-year employment, et cetera. So when you decompose functions in the stakeholder group, you have a discontinuity. There's a problem. There's a power imbalance on goals. So this story is all about power. Power is the ability to get things done when goals conflict. So these architectures at CEO level and above it's a power story, and we'll talk about that. So really quickly, in 30 seconds, the 3 dimensions I defined, these enterprise architectures, they're organizational, not physical. The objective functions are radically different. The objective function of modular is to maximize shareholder value. It's singular, it's very simple. So there's a zero-sum fight amongst the stakeholders to extract rent and give it to the shareholders. The objective function of integral is much more politically complex. You're trying to maximize stakeholder surplus. We'll talk about that later if that's interesting. The boundaries of what you're maximizing or optimizing are very narrow in space and time for modular. They want to maximize the performance of the firm. So they have, as Stu already mentioned, a high quantity of low-quality relationships with providers of capital, labor, customers, suppliers, et cetera. Orthogonal to that is the people running the CEOs and top management teams of Integral. And think Toyota, Southwest Airlines, Airbus, Nucor Steel. In your industry, there's SAS. So I'm interested in those people that are managing to longer time frames, and so they have broad boundaries, broad in space and stakeholder space, not geographic and time. So something interesting already. They're attracting patient capital that enables them to guarantee jobs for life in return for product. There's a very different story going on. Finally are the interfaces which Stu talked about. So the information that flows between stakeholder chunks is very different. So The blue thing, the modular thing, is a market, right? Adam Smith told us about this. If you just functionally silo and create competition within and between stakeholders, you get a very efficient beast that builds industries. That's the modular thing. But if you have the exact opposite, so instead of having a high quantity of low quality relationships, if you pick one or two and stick with them for life, you put yourself in a powerless position. We'll hopefully talk about trust later. So at any rate, the information that flows between stakeholders in an integral enterprise architecture is very messy and complex. So you're making high-level political trades. You're getting low-interest loans or patient capital in return for guaranteeing jobs for life. You get lock-in with customers. You work with suppliers. So they're very different beasts, okay? I'm not going to go into the detail, but at the bottom you see the behavior of red and blue are wildly different. The modular things are built for short-term speed and flexibility, so they create the business cycle, which is what we're all talking about, doing more with less, and how do we, what is the outcome of a modular thing? It's designed to build industries. The red guys are late entrants that take industries that are already built. The blue guys are radical product innovation. The red guys are radical process innovation. They're different species. I'm almost done. So let's just, now that's the continuum. We can talk about it, and maybe it's not relevant, but I also wanted, this is a very predictive model that explains which wins and why, under what market conditions. So if you look at the next page, there's an S-curve, and I'm looking at the market environment on two dimensions, quantity and technology quality. So if the market rates are growing over time, the beginning of the S-curve, you have to move faster and faster. So all enterprise architectures, empirically, this is all empirically based, we all start out integral, like the MIT startups with radical product innovation. When they lock into something cool and sexy that the users want, they have to disintegrate or modularize over time, and it's a bunch of blue modulars competing over speed. So that's how you build the industry. You go from integral to modular, and then as the environment turns and you saturate markets, it slows down again. Look at the slope of the line, and you see these late entrants who move more slowly because they make much more complex political trades. And then the final thing I'll say is that's on the type of widgets or service needed. Now the other question is, what is the rate of technological innovation? And it tends to start out fast. You underserve markets. Think Clay Christensen. And then when you overserve markets, the users are looking not more for higher, faster, farther products and services, but better, faster, cheaper. So you can see how these things grow and evolve and compete, and you get interesting things like interspecies competition between GM and Ford, the market makers who are struggling heavily against Toyota and Honda, et cetera. So it's just a way to talk this through and look at the extended enterprise. So I'll stop. Is that all right?
That's great.
All right.
So now we're going to hear from three folks who live in this world, and with that mental model, listen to their stories. We're going to go to Jay first with iRobot and ask him to explain how all of this plays out from ideation right to delivery of the product, because they are, as I said, a virtual corporation, and they have partnerships and a whole ecosystem that supports them. Jay?
So thank you for making me follow Ted. I'm certain not to be as articulate or high-thinking, but
Can you speak as fast?
yeah, I don't know that many words, and I can't get them out that fast. So no. So for us, I think a lot of things that Ted's talking about have manifested themselves at iRobot, and really our complete value chain from front to back is almost exclusively accomplished through partnerships and collaboration with other people. We actually keep very few things internal to ourselves. So obviously, the creation of product and the design of product, the creation of software, those things are integral and core values for us. So the IP is really the value that we add. The understanding of the problem and the understanding of the way to go and solve those things are strategic differentiators for us. We don't, as you might imagine, we don't share that with other people. And without that, in an increasingly crowded marketplace for robotics, you lose competitive advantage. But we start almost from the front end all the way through the back end by working with other people. So at the front end of any kind of robotics is research, right? And so we're heavily engaged with other people and people who bring money and people who bring ideas to kind of flush out concepts or product ideas or technologies that might ultimately end up in a robotic product at some point. So that's a pure collaborative exercise. So our research groups work with places like MIT, academic institutions. Certainly they work with agencies like DARPA, who are looking to solve product problems, but also pure research and pure conceptual kinds of problems to use, principally in the defense business. But when you bring it back closer to what we actually do on a day-to-day basis, we don't manufacture anything. That's not a core competency for us. So every robot that's made with an iRobot label is built by someone who's not an iRobot employee. And that's important to us because that's a place that does take capital and it does take management focus and thought that's really not core to the way that we strategically compete and the way that we make money. Similarly, on the sales side, again, we're not sales experts, right? We don't want to be selling and banging on doors to sell robots, right? And so we use extensive retail networks and distribution channels to say, we have our product, we will partner with you in terms of how we want to market it and how we want to position it and how to strategically differentiate it from the other places in the market. And we will collaborate on marketing campaigns and branding and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, a lot of that execution happens on the street by people whose paycheck doesn't say iRobot in the upper left-hand corner. For us, it's critically important because as a growing company with the same limitations on capital as other people have, we need to be sure that we're spending money in places that we can strategically differentiate ourselves and ultimately drive shareholder value, right? So shareholder value, a critically important thing for us. A great idea that cuts the stock price in half gets most of us fired, right? And we understand that. And very few of us raised our hands for that. So for us, being able to leverage what other people do well in the context of what we need to accomplish and where we're really core is very important. And I guess the other reason why I think it's important is that as competition grows, as the robotics market develops and as it matures, it's a classic phenomenon, right? So we're really the first people that had a robot that you could run in your home, right? And you fast forward 15 years later and now you see people like Samsung and LG, companies much, much bigger than us and with far more resources than we have to be able to apply to a problem. For us, it's really important that we focus on what we do well. We're never going to be able to manufacture at a lower cost than a Samsung or an LG who has a captive manufacturing operation and decades of experience putting robots together. We do think and we do compete expertly in terms of solving the problem and creating the IP and protecting the IP that actually most effectively solves the customer's problem and the reason that they're using that robot. So for us, it's really all about how can we marshal our resources and our assets in the most strategic way and take things that we aren't good at or that we don't want to apply our resources and give them to other people. So I do think that in many ways we're an extended enterprise and a semi-virtual corporation, and that's the challenge that we have to support.
Great, thanks very much. Now let's go to Tim. As I mentioned before, you're the chairman of One End Service, which is a consortium of companies like Tim's main company, Atrion, and they've been using social networking tools for, what, 9 years, something like that? And so can you tell us a little bit about how this consortium came about, how you built the IT infrastructure to make it work, but also how the human interaction is still extremely important, how you get together physically and so forth.
Good. Well, I'm glad that you shared how long you've been in this industry, because when I say Atrion's been in business for 23 years, I don't feel as old now. So, but we started 23 years ago, and our main focus is being an IT services company for mid-market clients. And one thing that's interesting about mid-market clients, they have a huge job to grow their companies and try to radically transform them. And quite frankly, they're not having conversations about extended enterprises. They're just doing what they think they need to do. So we spent a lot of time in the early years helping clients try to run, grow, and transform their organizations. We saw a major shift happening in the pre-2000 years, 1997, 98, 99, where these organizations were being stretched. We saw them, if they were regional, they were starting to become national. If they were national, they were becoming global. And what we found, it was harder and harder to be able to support those clients. We also saw another trend with IT services companies where they were trying to commoditize the space. We saw a lot of competitors go to online. You can buy IT online. You could buy a router or switch, a PC online, and became very transactional. So what we chose collectively to do is to stay very, very high-touch type of organization, help these mid-sized clients really, face these or address these challenges they were facing on just trying to run and grow and transform the organization. So around 1998, 99, a number of IT services companies, there's about 10 of us that got together at different forums. And we'd all go to the same forums, like Interop, and we'd all sit around and commiserate about IT and where it was going, and the Y2K and how it was going to change the world, and all this, and .com was going to change the world. And for a couple of years, we started building this very in-depth trust relationship where we would informally share information. So in 2000, we said, what if we formed a group, and our main purpose of this group was to get together to actually take this to the next level. And so we really came together. We created One in Service at that point in time, and there were 10 original founders of that organization. And we got together 3 to 4 times a year. And the main purpose was to share best practices. A lot of our companies, we were on the forefront of what we were doing. We were doing groundbreaking things. There wasn't a lot of documentation on where to go next. So what we do is we get together for a day or two at a time, and we would share volumes of information, from financial sheets all the way to compensation plans, to technology roadmaps that we're looking to roll out. And as we started to do that, we said, this is a pretty interesting model. And that kind of worked for a good 4 years in that model. And we expanded to 12. We kept it very small and tight. Everybody knew everyone. We knew most of the employees at all the other companies. So it was very tight, very formal. We all shared common values, common beliefs. So if I ever had a need in California, where a client was going to open up a new office in California, I could call up my friend that was in California. I could say, I need a high-skill engineer to do this high-touch implementation out there. Can you help us? And we were very confident that the quality of work that we would do here in New England would be met in California, just delivered through a different model. So as we started seeing that, we said, well, wouldn't it be great if we expanded and had more people and covered more geography? So we started to expand. As we started to expand, we found the loose kind of formal, informal structure didn't work well. And so we started going through a process where we started to formalize. And we got about 18 people. We created a website. It was a standard website. We had information about linked to all the company's websites, so we could actually go to one place, get all the information we wanted. It was pretty static. It didn't change very often. So it was an okay tool, but it wasn't something that was more robust. About 6 years ago, a little bit longer than that, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, just before MySpace and Facebook really took off, we created an informal social networking tool that allowed our members to connect, allowed them to control content that was posted to this site. They could talk about their capabilities. We could share best practices online, so I could go find comp plans that people had posted out there, download them, look at mine, make adjustments to my comp plan, then post it back up. So we were sharing information. And that was kind of the first phase of kind of bringing this all together. So now if I needed someone in Dallas, Texas, I could go to this website. Instead of sending out a broad email to all the members, I go to this website, find the 2 companies that had the skill that we wanted. I would call them or email them. We'd have this informal conversation. They would agree to help us. We talked about an informal way that we exchanged revenues in that process, and we'd actually transact the job. And what was nice about this, it was a high trust relationship that we had. Our clients were getting the same kind of touch and feel that they would get from our company locally. Our competitors at this point in time are big companies like IBM Global. And what was interesting about that is when you dealt with IBM Global, the person in Boston doesn't know the person in Dallas. They don't have an intimate relationship. We actually had a much tighter relationship, and we could actually address the client's need at a much greater level and depth than the larger companies could. As we went through, we found that we needed to have something more dynamic. So after doing the social networking that allowed us to share information, we then created an online enterprise search engine. And this became much more detailed in the fact that we can now go in and put every person has a specific certification on this website. We could post different technology expertise that we had, different verticalization expertise, and we could do very complex searches to find the one company that could actually help us in a particular area. And that grew over time. Now we have 40 members that cover essentially North America, Central America, and South America. This last year we just added Europe and Russia, so we have 17 companies that can help us in that. So now we're expanding that reach, and just most recently what we've added is the opportunity to track online opportunities. So I can go on and post, I have a need for XYZ, I want to partner with someone in this technology for this particular client, and members can now respond to that, provide the insight, provide details. We can track the opportunity of revenue flowing. So we're actually becoming a little bit more formalized, but it's still a very fluid system.
Thanks a lot. And now Marc. Salesforce.com has got a lot of tools.
I have a customer here for chatter, maybe.
I was thinking
we need to talk about that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, when we interviewed him, I said, "Yeah, what would you use if you wanted to upgrade your platform?" And he mentioned maybe Chatter. Yeah. So that's good. Anyway, you do have products to help enable this new, richer information flow between members of an extended enterprise. So can you tell us a little bit about what you have today and then where you see this going in the future.
Sure, sure. The trends that we're seeing broadly, at least our position on some of these trends, is that we're seeing kind of a transition of applications and how they've been directed. So in the 80s, you had kind of business logic-centric applications. In the 90s, you started to see more customer-centric applications and internet-based applications. And what we believe now is happening is that we're seeing really what we're calling conversation-centric applications. And we're talking about conversations happening between you and your customers, you and your suppliers, you and your distributors, and even internally inside your organization, capturing that information. Some of the products that we provide are tools or a platform for enabling this. And what we're calling this broadly is the social enterprise platform. What it is it's a tool that allows you to bring these conversations together, to facilitate them, to engage them, and even to analyze them, to understand them and what's happening across your ecosystem of your customers and your suppliers and your extended enterprise in essence.
Great.
The broader trend is an interesting one. It's one that has, been, we believe has really been the catalyst behind it, has been the kind of the three mega trends that are happening right now in the industry, which are social, mobile, and then the cloud. These things are the catalyst for this. When you look at what we're calling, we don't really call it the extended enterprise per se, we call it a networked enterprise now, as that's kind of the term that we leverage. When you look at the benefits of the networked enterprise, you're talking about kind of three types or three tiers of progression or maturity of the fully networked enterprise. And one is really the internally networked enterprise, so that you have tools internally like a Facebook-style tool like Chatter, where you can now all of a sudden collaborate across lines, across geographies. The next level up is where someone is now extending it out to your suppliers, extending it out to maybe a customer possibly. And then to be fully networked, to be that highest level, the most mature level, is to be really leveraging all of these tools and to bring different parties together, bringing different conversations together. So using an example for healthcare, just take, for example here, a medical device company. In a medical device company, you might have a portal for your customers. For someone who's looking for information about that device, maybe it's call it a knee replacement is the particular device we're talking about. Someone's getting a knee replacement. It's a very traumatic surgery. They want to learn about it. They come to the site. They learn about the actual the implant that's going into their body. They then want to engage someone in conversation. So they begin to engage the product company in conversation. At the same time, that product company most likely is having a conversation with the doctor themselves through another portal or another channel. That doctor is now engaging that same product person. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you can now bring those three people together, bring the doctor, the product company, and bring the actual patient in this case together, and actually have a collaborative conversation, exchanging materials, exchanging ideas. I can tell you right now, that person, that patient, will feel a lot better. It'll increase brand loyalty. It'll increase their an overall awareness of the company itself. Not to mention also from the doctor's side, someone who actually chooses which implant to use, there's also a level of engagement there that we've never had before. And we think this is something that's going to happen broad-based across the industry. And these are going to be things that are differentiators for organizations long-term.
Fantastic. Now we have just a couple follow-up questions, and it's going to be time to go to the audience questions. So can you just mention the Groupon thing? You said you could talk about that publicly and just describe how you're creating really a social networking site for not yourselves, but others who then extend beyond that. So if you imagine an extended enterprise, you could say it goes one level out from you, but then those are networked and then they're networked, and where does it stop?
So what's interesting about this is that when you look at these sets of applications that we're talking about, a lot of them are, they're front office applications. And as a whole, as a broader kind of discussion, we do believe that they're, just like in the 80s and the 90s, there became these platforms for ERP for the back office. We believe that there is now going to be a need for a platform for the front office. And it's going to be something that is handling all the different channels and handling those conversations between different channels. And so Groupon did come to us recently, and we started kind of synthesizing some ideas around what they can do around that, around their different sales channels, their merchants, how they engage their merchants. And one of the ideas that we were playing with was this idea of allowing a kind of their merchants to come in and engage not just Groupon themselves, but also have more visibility into what's happening within a Groupon, within a particular discount. So, for example, within each Groupon, sometimes people will pay for the Groupon, but not actually, they won't actually redeem the Groupon at the merchant's site. So wouldn't it be nice if a list of all those people, of all those customers, plus even the ones that didn't redeem, were all available to that merchant, and then that merchant can then go and log into this portal, and then go a step further, and then actually engage those customers. So it's not even, it's their own customers, but they're also Groupon's customers, and so you're creating this kind of interweave network between, really, when you think about it, they're actually both people's customers, in essence. They're both Groupon and the merchant's customers. Yeah. So that's an example of actually going a kind of 2 degrees beyond that. Yeah. And then, of course, you have your just your straight-up engagement with your customers itself. We had talked a little bit about this the other day, which was creating a dialogue with your customers. A brand like Dell uses a site, their site is called IdeaStorm, and what it is, it's an ideation site. It's a site where really Dell is handing over a portion of the product management responsibilities to their customers and saying, well, why don't, through a crowdsourced model where customers can come in and put ideas in, and then those ideas can be voted up to the top. When those ideas hit a certain critical mass, a certain number of votes, Dell will then basically look at it and decide whether this should become a project or not. What a great concept, right? Creating a dialogue, starting a dialogue with your customers on what your next product should be. Not only do you create better brand awareness, you also have, in essence, a built-in group of people who want to buy this product when it is developed. But from a loyalty standpoint, it's unparalleled. You can't beat that. You're talking about, customers asking for something and companies actually responding. And the important part of this dialogue is, of course, that the companies do respond. Because there's been some failures around this where companies have tried to engage people, engage the extended enterprise, and unfortunately, they may listen but not actually respond. So a very important part of this is to, in fact, respond, to show that people's hard work of putting their ideas in and actually caring about a brand is actually being redeemed.
So Marc, that's an interesting point, though. So you mentioned that I do agree it's about creating conversations and creating dialogue. That's an important part of this. But one of the conversations we have a lot in service, and even at our own company, Atrion, is how do you actually build that extended, trusted relationship through online mechanisms? Because it seems to be somewhat impersonal. I'm not sure how you guys see that, but how are you guys helping to do that?
Well, the Dell idea is a good one, but let's use another idea. Another example is Starbucks. So Starbucks did the same thing. Mm-hmm. They put out an idea site, an ideation site. So the key was, first the idea is you put the site out, you promote it, you use some basic promotion. And this is part of kind of what we do. We provide the software, but we also provide the best practices because this stuff's brand new. And not a lot of people know how to do this. And so we do kind of put our consulting hat on a little bit, although we do bring partners in also to do this in a lot of cases. But what it is, it's you first promote the site, you get the kind of the dialogue started. Maybe you run a promotion, maybe you run, in Starbucks case, you say, okay, well, if you come to the site and suggest some ideas, we'll give you some discounts on coffee. But the key is that once the inflow of conversation comes, is that the company has to be very reactive. In the case of Starbucks and both Dell, they actually would go a step further. They actually showed which ideas hit that critical mass, and then what happened with those ideas. And so, okay, this idea we implemented. So in the example of Dell, the Linux version or Linux configuration, the Ubuntu configuration, was actually an idea that came from their community. And so there was direct feedback. There was a direct correlation to the idea you submitted, the idea you voted up, to actually a product being developed. But there's also examples of ones where the company said, you know what, we're not going to do this one, and they actually gave some feedback and said, this is why we're not going down this path. We appreciate your feedback, and just the acknowledgement that there is feedback coming is what actually starts to cultivate that community.
So it's not just the tool that's the tool doesn't make it build a trusted relationship. Is how you respond and use the tool. So transparency is a huge.
It really is about transparency.
But trust is a very transient thing, right? I mean, trusting that you took my idea for the newest latte for Starbucks, right, is maybe just a transaction, right? It's not necessarily trust, right? And I think trust is very transient, especially when your economic or other motivations begin to diverge, right? So I think, I think of Europe, right, and I bet the Greeks and the Germans have a very different perspective on membership in the EU, right, where one has saved and the other has spent, right? And so it seemed like a good idea at the time, right? But maybe not so much now, right? And if you're a German you know, you might not be too happy with the behavior of your trusted EU partners in Greece or Portugal or in Spain who are taking a lot of your money to make up for the sins that they had. And I think, you know, part of the notion of this extended enterprise is you have to be very careful about, we're not partners, right? Partners to me are people who share losses, right? Unless you're willing to share the loss, then your trust is transient as long as our interests are aligned. And interests can be aligned at a given point in time, and then they can diverge, right? And in our business, we are aligned with our manufacturers until the price of oil goes to $147 a barrel and the price of their plastic component goes up 35%. They are unsympathetic to our notion that we don't really want to raise our end customer price. We are unsympathetic to the problem of them having to buy plastic for more money, right? So what do we do there? Now, we have a common interest in selling robots, because if we sell robots, they sell parts. But at the end of the day, we're not taking a 35% cost increase, thank you very much, right? And they may not be happy about having to eat that 35% increase in costs, right? So I think, you know, part of the notion here is trust when and for how long, and what are you actually willing to do? Where is the outer boundary of my ability to give up my objective in order to serve you? My practical experience, and I am a Luddite and a pragmatist at heart, is pretty much when it comes down to it's going to cost me money, not so much. Not so much.
So now it's time to go to the question. I know you probably have a good perspective on that, but we promised 20 minutes to the folks. So if someone has a question, if you want to line up behind the mics, and we're going to have people working the mics to help you. If not, we'll continue. But it looks like we're going to have some action. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Brian Cobb from Fannie Mae. I run business operations, so I may be a little bit of a different animal for the conference. My question is for Dr. Pippenbrock. So, you know, in your model, you talk about the business cycle, and initially, product innovation drives, you know, productivity or you know, business returns, and then as it moves up the curve, it moves towards process focus. And my question is, you know, a lot of entities have these legacy IT infrastructures, legacy applications, and there's always this issue of migrating to a new, better platform. And does this business cycle that you talk about sort of add to that problem? Is that sort of the underlying genesis for this technical issue we have? And how do you address that?
In fact, we should switch. You should put the mic on. I mean, you're stealing the thunder. Your intuition is fantastic. So again, let me just quickly say, I'm agnostic as to which is better, modular or integral. I'm putting a typology, and I'm saying under certain environmental conditions, this will win over that. Now, your point is really valid. Look around the room, and use the model to predict why we're all here. If I were asked a raise of hands, most of us are in world-class companies that are transitioned from inventing a cool new technology or service and exploiting it, building the market. And therefore, we are modularizing. This goes to Jay's story, which is it's all about trust. And trust is not only transient, it's nonlinear. You start out with long-term trust-based relationships, and you have to disintegrate and modularize in order to build it, because you're competing against other guys that are doing it faster. So this is a one-way thing. Start out trust, disintegrate and destroy trust because you have to. And as the market continues to change, you should reintegrate, but it's easier for the environment to grow a new firm than, because trust is nonlinear. It takes forever to build, and you ruin overnight. But your point is really interesting. And yeah, I mean, you can address it to these guys as well, but how the technology commoditizes and the service goes, it's different enterprise architectures reward different behaviors. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, any thoughts? I mean,
thoughts from the other panelists?
Yeah, I would just add, I think that, I don't know if I necessarily agree or disagree per se on the transient nature of trust. I think that in certain cases, trust, there's relationships that have a defined time period. And those time periods are controlled by other standards. But the way we look at it, there's people I dealt with in 2000 that I don't deal with anymore. But for the nature of what we do, we have to have a high level of trust. I need to know that when I send someone on site, they're going to do right by the client. I'm sure when you have a new robot you want it built to a certain quality standard, and there's a high level of trust. So as long as the conditions make it important. Trust is really, really important driving factor. If there's no trust, you can't trust you get quality. You can't trust that your tools aren't going to work correctly. Then it's not going to work no matter what you do, no matter if it's a transactional type of modular model or an integrated model.
Can I quickly just so Tim, as I apply the model to Tim's company, for example, so this is a radical product innovator that's exploiting a market and disintegrating because it needs to and it will, and it's doing, and that's why you hear Jay talk about the relationship with suppliers. It has to be that way. And what's interesting, and I think Boeing is a radical product technology that has military and civilian, and there are two different businesses like theirs. One is much more commoditized, civilian, and they're up against these late entrant red guys who are going to beat them, who are going to try to compete against quality cost delivery. You guys chose, you're an integral enterprise architecture based on trust. Here's the architect. And here's what, to go back to your point, the integral enterprise architects, CEO level, they have the courage to say no. They know that the maximum rate of growth is much slower than the maximum possible. So whether it's setting production rates, they choose to go, they say no, and they attract quality of investors that are really, that don't, the impatient capital flees and the patient capital comes in. But to your point, spending on R&D or spending on IT, we've got to get the latest one because the other guys have it. And so we're always locking into legacy things where you look at the Toyota Southwest Airbus, they slow down, they're second mover, they watch us all panic and do more with less, and they do incremental small things. So this continuous improvement in technology choices. And I'm not saying it's better, I'm saying under certain environmental conditions, that's the logic as to how and why SAS does what they do. Their best years were 2009 and 10 when we're all tightening the belts, right? So it's not better, it's just a different way to organize and it works in certain environments, sorry. Yeah.
How about a question from this side?
Yes. Robert Johnson, Boston Sim. What does leadership look like and how is it different in the extended enterprise versus the traditional enterprise?
Yeah, so I think it's very different, and I think the notion of having to build and maintain relationships, which you could articulate or extend to trust, right, is much more important than ever, right? Because the political skill needed, the recognition and understanding that other people have interests that have to be served, the way that you run your company, the way that you set up control, command and control, right, is far different in an extended enterprise than it is in a kind of monolithic, we own all of the means of production and we own all the control factors. And I think it takes a different set of skills than back when I was a young man, where when I worked at Data General, we made everything. We made monitors, we made printers, we made chips, we made everything, right? And so the monolithic leadership of that company was quite different now then than it is now, where you're not making anything and you have to pull it all together. So your ability to identify who is the right partner, what do we believe are the attributes of the people that we want to work with, right? Because you do usually have choices, right? You usually have choices. And so your ability to understand who you want to work with and why and what motivates you to work in that collective is more imperative than ever, I think. Yeah.
I'd like to add to what Jay said, and I think he mentioned it earlier when he was talking about doing the introduction of your organization, how you use extended enterprise. I think that what you see when in an extended enterprise organization, you really got to understand if that's the kind of model you're going to create, you have to understand what your core function is. So you defined your core function as these 3 or 4 key things. And I think what happens is when you understand that, that's probably going to really narrowly define what you're going to invest in. And I think it's hard a lot of times in business to be disciplined enough to stay focused on those cores. And it takes the right kind of leadership, not only to keep your vision there, but also get your entire team to buy into it. We deal with a lot of IT companies that are challenged with IT. And one of the challenges they don't have the staff to actually support the IT correctly. They don't have the expertise, the depth of expertise. It's hard today in a converged environment to have people that are experts in all areas. Yet they refuse to kind of consider partnering with other people to help take some of the burden off the IT element. And it's because the model of the organization, they believe that's job security, and they're focusing on running IT instead of helping their business grow and transform by using IT in that fashion. So leadership has to be able to sit down with those people and say, listen, we need you to help us transform, not to run IT. There's better ways to do that. We can outsource, we can partner with different companies that can provide that expertise at a much higher level and probably a lower cost.
Now, one of the big questions about, I'll get to, did you actually have a question or no? Yes, okay. First I just want to follow up on that one of the big leadership questions for a CIO is, what should I do to enforce an architecture in the extended enterprise? Can I make others do what I tell them to do? So Walmart, for example, and their supply chain can just say, well, everybody's got to hook up to exactly this, or you're not going to be playing here. Or are you a small player and you have to choose, well, who should I follow the leadership of? Or are you in between and you say there is no leadership? Should we get a consortium together and create something? And at iRobot, you have decided to enforce at least one thing, the product lifecycle management system that you use, PTC Windchill, you have forced on your contract manufacturer, but yet there are other areas where you've decided not to. And could you just say a little something about the leadership that you decided to exert versus not exert?
Yeah, you know, both at the company level and just internal to IT, right? I mean, so for those of you who are IT professionals, just the question of what device will I allow you to carry, right? So, you know, old grizzled people like me grew up in the era where we will define, you will carry a BlackBerry and that's what it is. And so thank you for your iPhone and thank you for your Droid. You can leave those at home and use them as your toys, right? That's an unrealistic objective now. It's unrealistic. And so I think hard about, you know, a federal and state model, right? There are federal laws that you can't violate, and then there are states' rights. And to me, putting the decision-making as close to the point of attack as you can without corrupting and disrupting the rest of the enterprise is how I try to do that. We do product development in a certain way that we have a strategic advantage. It's important that we be able to support that, and it's important that we don't let rogue initiatives or rogue processes disrupt our overall, right? And one of the reasons we enforce the PLM is because we like to use our engineering resources across different divisions and across different products. If every time you get assigned to a product, you're using a different set of tools, that's incredibly ineffective and incredibly complicated. And the fact of the matter is we want to be able to leverage those people, and we have an objective that says we want people to be able to work on other things. If you are in the home robot division and you want to work on a government robot, we ought to be able to enable you to do that, because there's a lot of competition for that talent and there's a lot of other places for them to go. So to the extent humanly possible without disruption, I try to let people have, at the point of attack, have the tools that they need. But just like in America, there are certain federal laws that you're going to have to pay Social Security whether you like it or not. That's the way it is. So get over it, but the rest of it you can decide at the state level.
Thanks. Let's go to Jerry's question here.
Thank you. I wanted to get back to the question of trust. If you listen to game theory, it says trust exists only as long as there's a shadow of interaction. So the question to the panelist is, A, do you believe that this dogma still exists? And B, if yes, how do you increase that shadow of interaction?
Ted has a
No, I'm happy to jump in really quickly. No, great question. So I have the privilege of teaching in liberal market economies like US, UK, and then coordinated market economies like Germany, France, Japan, and the ideologies are radically different. So Adam Smith and the whole liberal market economy says, and we've won Nobel Prizes for this, Prisoner's Dilemma, says trust is not, it's not only not necessary, it's a bad thing. So the modular thing, we shouldn't get nervous about this, and I'm not, you know, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. In the limit, you're not actually supposed to trust. Now, if you could somehow build trust, you can get to a higher state, but it's not stable. So that's what's interesting, going back to the leadership thing, is how do these integral enterprise architects, Herb Kelleher at Southwest, Ken Iverson at Nucor, Goodnight at SAS, what are they doing that's it's not sustainable, but they're doing it, and I would argue it's strategic leadership. They have the ability to grow trust, and remember, trust is, it's not the sharing of, you know, kids' photos or, you know, what I did, you know, bar mitzvah photos. Trust is you have the confidence that in exchange your vulnerabilities are not going to be exploited, and it's an action, not a set of data. And so what these guys do is they leave rent on the table, they take massive hits when there's a downturn, they don't lay people off. So it's an action, but again, I like your question, which is the ideology of liberal market economies. It tells you exactly how to build a market fast. And you don't waste your time with trust. You build markets, it's not supposed to be trust. In fact, contentiously, the more you trust, the worse you get. And so again, the last thing I'll say is these people, these leaders are strong reciprocators. In biology, like the queen bee, they have a way, they create a superorganism, which is an extended enterprise, which gets people to suppress competition. So when they seek defection, they punish it publicly. Toyota does that with its suppliers, and so does South. But cooperation is an unnatural thing in human systems, but there are certain types of leaders that can get high shareholder value by doing this unstable thing in a prisoner's dilemma. Sorry.
Thanks. We have 2 more questions, and that'll be it. But let's try in the next 3 minutes to get yours and then yours.
Yeah, so my questions are actually also kind of related to this trust thing. So because a lot of the discussion today kind of may remind me of Michael Porter recently had a new research on share value, because the capitalism really came under fire in the last couple of years, and then he feels like there's a real need to redefine value creation, meaning to bring in business and society back closer together. So I was wondering, what are the panelists' thoughts on perhaps extending this definition of extended enterprise to even further, to really think about the social value creation, and how do you reinvest in a community from a business standpoint of view?
Anybody have a thought?
I mean, I have an example, maybe.
Yeah, good.
That's thought of leveraging of. It's going to be another Starbucks example, actually, of they leveraged their extended enterprise, their relationship with their customers. They put out a website a few years ago around something called Pledge 5, and what it was it was basically playing off Obama's kind of rekindling of our social responsibility inside this country. And basically what it was very simple. You committed 5 hours of community service, you get a free cup of coffee, right? And so it's just a great example of trying to rally their customers around a social cause, of extending beyond just them donating or them getting behind a charity, but them actually rallying their network, their customers in this case, not their partners or suppliers, and rallying them around social cause, a particular social cause in this case, which was just basically a broad-based kind of a movement around social responsibility. So that was just an example of something along those lines.
Yeah, I can use an Atrion example. We're a regional company, so we service the New England areas. Our extended network includes, on one side, one in service. We have relationships with our clients that are somewhat different, and there's a almost extended enterprise with some of our clients. And we have our suppliers like Cisco. We're really connected to community, really around education. And our goal is in the kids that are in the K through 12 system to help them improve their overall long-term success in education, getting more than a college, high school diploma, getting some kind of college or some kind of advanced certification. So that's part of it. So what we've done is we've actually used our extended network to actually fund projects to actually bring students together around a common thing. An example of this is that every year we host something called Girl Tech. We started this about 8 years ago. It was funded by the state in the first year. Then what happened was the state funding went away, and the program was in jeopardy. So we went to our suppliers, Cisco being one of the main ones, and said we need money. We went to some of the companies that we've worked with in an extended environment, brought them in. We helped go into some of the client community and brought in companies like FM Global and Raytheon to actually help fund this. We're now in our 8th year of this program. We are, I think, servicing 500 young women that come to a program and they learn about technology, math, engineering, science for a one-day event extravaganza. But that's another way to bring that trusted relationship together, to pull those parties together to rally around a cause.
Great example. And for our last question.
It's interesting because the last 2 questions were about trust, and my question's about trust. It certainly got a lot of enthusiastic interest. I guess I just wanted to say, and then maybe you can respond to me, some of what I was hearing about trust felt very much like the old sort of win-win or win-lose kind of thinking. And I just don't subscribe to that. I think that trust really isn't necessarily transient. It's that at any given time, one is slightly up and the other might be slightly down, but in the whole, what you're looking to do is even out and have a relationship that on the whole feels equalized. And that really, when you're looking at your extended enterprise, I think there's still way too much closing in and sort of guarding against the other and not trusting. And that, in fact, creates a lot of opportunity for this transient trust that really doesn't result in a true relationship and a true ongoing partnership. And with extended enterprises, you're gonna have to come to terms with that and find a way to get sustained trust through a series of compromises.
So I think that's right, but the level of trust is only as strong as the weakest link, right? And as soon as somebody breaks that trust, now all bets are off, right? So the EU all decided that they would act responsibly, right, as a collective. And then some people didn't, right? And when oil went to $147 a barrel, one of our trusted partners said, either you give us a price increase or we're going to stop shipping you robots, which means you're going to stop shipping robots to your customers. We were trust up until the point where we diverged economically, right? And so, you know, I think capitalism is a brutal system, right? And I think the best of intentions and the best behavior notwithstanding, there comes a point where in the natural system there's a divergence of interests. And, you know, I think everybody's response, the natural one, it's certainly mine and probably most of yours as well, is to say, I'm in until I can't be, right? And then I have to be out. And that doesn't mean you don't trust, it doesn't mean you don't act ethically, it doesn't mean that you don't plan with good intent to honor what you say. But when circumstances change, as they always do, I totally understood why the supplier wanted more money when his price went up radically. I did not appreciate we're closing the factory on Friday and not shipping you any robots. And there's a difference, right? So, you know, there's ethical action and then there's intent, and I think you have to, there's a distinction.
I missed the young woman's name. What was your name? Okay. I agree with your philosophy. I think that's where I look at it. I look at trust being based on three elements, right? The content of the character of the individual or entity you're working with. Closing down, you know, telling you to close down a factory at 5 o'clock goes to the character of that individual. I would never do that. I assume you would never do that to your clients, your customers, your partners. You would work through it with them. So the character is a huge element. The second thing that I look at with trust, it really comes down to your actions. Do your actions reinforce? You can say all day long we want to have a partnership, but your actions on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is where sometimes we fall down. We make mistakes, we don't deliver. What I really measure the relationship on is how well do I stand back up and get the relationship back on track. And so the third area is the competency. How competent are they? If they can't deliver your product with quality goods, they can't go out and service my customer with the same vigor that I would, then the competency is not where we need it to be to have a strong, trusted relationship. My fundamental belief is with relationships, it's a long-term investment I'm making that I have to, if I want to create a relationship with one, I have to be willing to invest before that person's willing to invest. And I refer to you got to give to get. That's the kind of mindset. And the second element is that I'm optimistic. I'm an optimistic type of person. I assume everyone is going to treat me right. And if they don't, then you know I've learned a lesson and I move on. But I'd rather think the best of people and constantly judge and evaluate whether or not that relationship is in our best interest and make adjustments if someone proves me wrong, that they're not worth the trust. So that's kind of how I do it. And we look at it as long term. It's a 10, 20-year cycle. And it works for our business. It probably may not work for your business, but
Thank you very much. We are now out of time. So I'm sorry, Ted. We could go on for hours, but we've hit the limit.
Thank you for the exciting conversation. Thank you all panelists. This was wonderful.